Tuesday morning, coffee still hot in my hand, and my fence, the one I built myself, was suddenly sitting 7 feet inside my property line like the HOA had redrawn reality before breakfast. They'd stapled a laminated notice to the new post that said, "Property line adjusted for community aesthetic standards," which is a polished little sentence for, "We took part of your yard and expected you to smile." I was still reading it when a white Lexus rolled up and Gloriana Fitch stepped out, looking pleased with herself. She stood there waiting for a thank you. "Mr. Harlow," she said, "I think you'll find it looks much cleaner now." I looked at the moved fence, the fresh post holes, the strip of my grass she'd erased, and said, "Gloriana, you just moved 7 feet of my land." She smiled, got back in the Lexus, and drove away. That was the moment this stopped being about a fence. My name is Decker Harlow. I've lived on Creosote Ridge Road in Mineral Springs, Colorado for 11 years. Before that, I spent a decade doing contract welding in places that were cold, loud, and honest. When I finally came home, I bought a corner lot with cottonwoods, a workshop, and room to breathe. I rebuilt half the place myself, including that cedar fence along the eastern line. 3 weekends, a lot of sweat, and a survey done before the first post went in. I knew exactly where that fence belonged. The Mineral Springs Heritage Homeowners Association had always been a nuisance. Trash bin, letters driveway, complaints, little attempts to turn normal life into a violation. And at the center of it all was Gloriana, HOA president. For so long, people talked about her like bad weather. She didn't like me because I worked with my hands, used my shop, and had once beaten one of her fines on procedure. So when her 4-page letter arrived claiming my fence violated an HOA buffer easement and had to be moved inward by 7 feet, I wasn't surprised. I was irritated, but not surprised. I took my survey report, took her letter, and drove to the county clerk's office for a full title search. $12. The easement she cited was real, but it applied to lots 12 through 17. I'm lot 19. Not arguable, just not mine. A reasonable man might have sent a polite correction. I'd tried polite before. It got me delay and silence. So this time I requested a formal hearing by certified mail. Under Colorado law, they were supposed to hear me out before taking action. Gloriana signed for the letter on Wednesday. By Friday, I had a hearing date, and buried in their response was the line that told me exactly who I was dealing with. While the hearing was pending, the HOA reserved the right to begin preliminary corrective work. 3 mornings later, an unmarked white pickup rolled up with a crew and a post puller. They got 11 posts out before I stepped outside with the title abstract in one hand and my phone recording in the other. "Morning," I said. "You boys are going to want to stop." The foreman took one look at the paperwork and called whoever had hired him. 12 minutes later, the white Lexus appeared. Gloriana crossed my lawn like she owned the dirt. "Mr. Harlow, this crew has authorization from the board. You are obstructing an authorized maintenance action." I held up the county records. "The easement you cited doesn't cover lot 19. Want to look?" She didn't look at the paper, she looked at my phone. "You're recording me." "We both are." Then she did me the biggest favor of her life. She kept talking. She said the HOA's internal records mattered more than county filings. She said I was being difficult. She said the board had full authority. I barely interrupted. Sometimes the quickest way to beat arrogance is to hand it a microphone. Eventually, she paused the crew and left. That same day, I filed complaints with code enforcement in the Colorado HOA office. I also got the contractor to confirm in writing who had ordered the work before the hearing. Instead of backing off, Gloriana doubled down. The next morning, my rose bushes were cut clean to the ground. A neighbor named Berta Quill knocked on my door and told me Gloriana had been going house to house, painting me as a hostile homeowner, causing drama. Then other neighbors started talking. Fines, denied permits, selective enforcement, petty threats. Nobody wanted to be first into the fight. They were waiting to see if somebody else would stay standing. So I did the least glamorous, most useful thing I've ever done. I read the HOA covenants line by line. That's where the twist was hiding. Buried in the common area section was a clause saying the HOA's main entrance, the big brick and iron gate with the polished sign Gloriana treated like a throne, had to sit on land the HOA owned outright or on a properly recorded easement. So I went back to the county records. Turns out the HOA did not own the dirt under most of that grand entrance. The land belonged to a corner lot owned by a man in Denver named Terrence Graff. The association had an easement across it, but that easement had a termination clause. If the HOA materially breached its own covenants in how it handled member properties, the landowner could revoke it. Because suddenly this wasn't a fence fight anymore. The one symbol of Gloriana's power, the gate every resident drove through every day, was standing on ground she didn't actually control. The formal hearing came a few days later. I presented the survey, the title abstract, the video, the contractor statement. Gloriana waved around an internal HOA map, like internal paperwork could rewrite county records. I asked for the official recording number proving the easement covered lot 19. There wasn't one. The board tabled the enforcement action. Not a full win, but enough to stop them from touching the fence again. After the hearing, another neighbor warned me Gloriana planned to come after my workshop next. So I went back into the documents, and while checking business use restrictions, I found something worse. A 2019 amendment to the HOA rules had supposedly been passed by the board alone, even though the covenants required a 2/3 vote of all members. That's when I hired Claudia Finn, a real estate attorney in Colorado Springs. At the same time, I called Terrence Graff. I didn't tell him what I wanted. I just showed him the records, the easement clause, and the evidence of the HOA's behavior. He had his own attorney review it and called me back sounding calm as a metronome. If this is accurate, he said, this is a significant title issue. Over the next few weeks, Claudia pulled the HOA records and found the 2019 amendment vote was fake. The meeting minutes showed 7 board votes in favor, even though the HOA only had 5 seats. They had invented a supermajority and spent years enforcing rules built on it. Once that came out, the whispers stopped. Berta stood up. Whit stood up. Other neighbors signed statements. By the time the annual community meeting rolled around that October, the clubhouse was packed. A reporter sat in the back. Gloriana sat at the front trying to look composed, but the room was no longer hers. When new business opened, I stood up and laid it out the fake easement on my lot. The crew sent before the hearing the falsified amendment vote, the pattern. Then Claudia explained the legal exposure in plain English. Then Berta spoke. Then more neighbors. Story after story, fine after fine, threat after threat. The membership voted 31-7 to invalidate the 2019 amendment and demand a full accounting. Right in the middle of the vote count, my phone buzzed. Text from Terrence, serving notice now. His attorney had sent the formal easement termination notice to the HOA's registered agent, 30 days before the association lost the legal right to maintain that grand entrance on his land. When the vote was announced, I stood back up and put a copy of the notice on the table in front of Gloriana. The room went dead silent. And I'll tell you something, I've never needed revenge to be loud. Sometimes the sweetest sound in the world is a room full of people saying nothing at all, while power realizes it finally has edges. Gloriana looked at the paper, then at me, and for the first time in 11 years, I didn't see confidence. I saw a woman realizing the ground under her favorite kingdom had never been hers. The rest happened the way real justice usually happens: paperwork, resignations, consequences. Gloriana resigned 12 days later. 3 board members followed. The HOA's insurer paid back households that had been fined under the invalid amendment. My fence was rebuilt at the association's expense. The HOA didn't lose the front gate in some movie-style demolition. What happened was better. They had to negotiate a brand new easement with Terrence openly, legally, and for fair payment on paper where everybody could see it. No more acting like authority and ownership were the same thing. And that's the part that stayed with me. Power gets away with a lot when it shows up holding official-looking paperwork. People see a board table, a laminated notice, a polished neighborhood sign, and they assume legitimacy. But truth lives in records, in deeds, in statutes, in the boring little details. Nobody checks because life is busy, and decent people assume other people are honest. That's the bitter lesson in all this. Most petty power doesn't depend on force. It depends on the assumption that you won't look. I looked. $12 at the county clerk's office. Certified male, a retired teacher with backbone. A landlord in Denver who cared about his title, and an attorney who knew exactly where to press. That was enough to unravel 20 years of swagger. A year later, the Reform Board used recovered funds to help start a community scholarship for local kids headed into the trades. First recipient was a senior going to welding school. I'm not saying the universe writes poetry, but sometimes it gets awfully close. So yeah, karma showed up. Not with sirens, not with a speech, but with signatures, public records, and a woman in a white Lexus leaving without a word. Now let me ask you this. If somebody slapped an official-looking notice on your property tomorrow, would you trust it because it looked official? Or would you go find out who actually owned the ground under it? And where do you think the line is between protecting a neighborhood and using paperwork like a weapon? Drop your take below. Who was right? Who crossed the line? And have you ever had to stand your ground against an HOA board or anybody else who mistook authority for ownership?
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video. Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.